Well, Iris Johansen is a New York Times best-selling author. Roy Johansen is an Edgar Award-winning author for suspense, and now the two have joined their considerable forces in the new novel Silent Thunder, and your fans have been waiting a long time for this book, I'll tell you that.
My first book tour in 10 years began in Atlanta, Georgia. Roy and I started our day on the Fox Morning Show, which was only the first of 4 broadcast interviews we did that day. That evening, we went to the Silent Thunder launch event, which was hosted by the Literary Center at the Margaret Mitchell House. This was where Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind, and there couldn't have been a better place to kick off our cross-country tour. After a reception, we talked on stage for an hour, discussing Silent Thunder, the collaborative process, and writing in general. Then we had a lively question and answer session. It was great fun. Due to the infamous Atlanta traffic, we didn't have time to drop off Roy's dog Jerry, so he joined us for the event. Roy had another surprise guest, his high school English and journalism teacher, who had awarded Roy his school's Creative Writing Award when he was in the 12th grade. It was a wonderful evening, the kind of night that made me wonder why I hadn't toured in so long. The next night, we were even closer to home, at a local Barnes & Noble store. We discussed Silent Thunder, answered more questions, and I talked to a young man named Christian Flesher, who showed me an interesting school project he had done based on me and my writing. He had put together a box of artifacts, photos, and written material that told me more about myself than even I had ever known. Again, it was so much fun meeting and talking to readers. Less than 12 hours later, we were on a plane to Connecticut for one of the most unusual stops on our tour. We were met by a limo and taken to the Foxwood Resort and Casino, which we learned was a popular venue for author events and book signings. The resort was beautiful, and we could see why it was such a popular vacation spot. The special events coordinator escorted us to the area where we would be speaking and signing that evening. The resort's grand ballroom was definitely the grandest location on our tour, and we were greeted by a dedicated and enthusiastic crowd. We discussed Silent Thunder, of course, and the audience was especially interested in my Eve Duncan thrillers. The next day, we appeared at a charming New England bookstore, R.J. Julia Booksellers. The staff was wonderful. Patsy made us feel right at home, and we spoke to readers and signed books, not only for the people there, but also for many customers who had pre-ordered their copies. From there, we went straight to New York City, where we appeared on a panel discussion and book signing at Thriller Fest 08, a major convention for thriller writers and fans right next to Grand Central Station. There wasn't much time to enjoy the city. We were soon on yet another plane as we began to work our way across the country.
Roy and I have always wanted to collaborate, but there wasn't an opportunity. I was writing nonstop novels. Roy was writing his novels, and he was also a screenwriter. But then he came back from Chicago one day and said, "What do you think about a submarine?"
I went to Chicago for a wedding, and one day my wife and I went to the Museum of Science and Industry, and they had an exhibit there I hadn't even known about. And what it is a captured German submarine, and it was captured during World War II, and it was brought to Chicago for this museum exhibit, and perfectly preserved. And they have on display, as you're waiting in line to get into the sub, all kinds of mementos and things that were found underneath the floor gratings. I mean, there's there's a chewing gum wrapper that some sailor had dropped one day in 1942 on display there. And the whole submarine is like a time capsule. And it was just really fascinating. And so I came back and told my mother about it. And she was instantly intrigued by it, and not only by the submarine itself, but by the whole process it came to be there.
When we first started talking about submarines, I was thinking, Tom Clancy? Not me, honey. Because much as I admire him, I'm not Tom Clancy, and really Roy isn't either.
Then we started doing what writers do oftentimes, and that's play a game of what if. And that game of what if started right as soon as I started telling her about this sub, and it continued. And we started thinking about, well, what if it wasn't a German submarine, but what if it was a Russian submarine, a Soviet submarine, and the people who served on it are still alive and still active? And what if there was a woman, a brilliant submarine designer, our Hannah Bryson, who was in charge of taking this submarine and making it a part of this museum exhibit? And what if she discovered a secret about it that catapulted her into this life or death adventure?
The sub, Silent Thunder, is really a museum piece. So not much of the action of the story takes place on it, but the story revolves around it. And just the fact that it does, we had to do a good deal of research.
And so we thought it was important to get an idea of what it felt like to be on a submarine, to actually experience it. You always see in the movies and read about how claustrophobic it is, but we thought it was important to actually see it for ourselves. And fortunately, there happens to be a decommissioned Russian submarine in Southern California, not far from where I live. So my mother and I took a visit to it, and it was fascinating, really.
We went to the control room, the torpedo room. We listened to all of the stories about how the sailors only were allowed one shower every 2 days, and that for just a few minutes. Not very much fun, huh?
One of the perks of a writer is to visit places that you might not visit otherwise in order to lend your work some more of that authenticity. And by broadening your knowledge of these different places and things, it lets you create more of an atmosphere for the reader than you probably would have been able otherwise. And our research went beyond just visiting the submarine. I talked to people who served on submarines, both in the Soviet Navy and in the United States Navy. And it was interesting getting the perspective from these two sides of the Cold War. And what interested me most is how similar their perspectives were.
The major part of the story actually takes place outside the sub, in Florida, globetrotting, Moscow, Boston. Our characters flitted all over the world in their search for revenge and adventure.
The next stop on our tour was Cincinnati, Ohio, but again, there wasn't much time for sightseeing. We actually had the busiest day of our tour here. First, we did the Fox Morning Show in Cincinnati. Then we went to Northern Kentucky for a popular mid-morning cable show there. Then we went to Dayton to drop in on the 12 o'clock news. After that, it was back to Cincinnati for an in-studio radio interview. And then we still had our autograph appearance in Dayton that evening. After a day like this, we couldn't think of a better way to celebrate than to sample some of the local cuisine. It was so good that we ended up craving it for the entire rest of the tour.